Hey everyone, welcome to Talk to Paldinja. Today I'm very happy to be joined by Dr. Warren Smith. This is a special interview for me because I have done over 1,000 interviews with Tibetan and Westerners in Tibetan. But today's interview is the first one in English. I believe it is important to recognize Westerners who have dedicated their whole life for Tibet cause. We should learn from them. Also, we appreciate their contribution. Dr. Warren Smith spent many years to support Tibetan, and also he worked Radio Free Asia Tibet Service over 20 years. He is my colleague, my friend for a long time. Also, he wrote several books, including Tibetan Nation, China's Tibet. Here is 5 book. So now we continue the conversation. Warren Smith, once again, thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you, Paulina.
The part one, we talk about your life in Tibet, Nepal, and India. So 1983, so you come back to America and seriously you studied Tibet. You wrote 5 books. How did this start?
Well, I had, from 1982 when I first went to Tibet, met Dolma, I had the intention to write history
Right.
of Tibet. It turns out Dolma told me 20 years later, 30 years later, Dolma told me that actually she had gone to Dharamsala before going to Tibet. And the Dalai Lama, I met with the Dalai Lama, and he had told her, find some NG to write a book about Tibet.
Right.
And she found me. And I was pretty much perfect person because I already had an interest in Tibet. I had a bit of scholarly inclinations or academic interest, and I was a sucker for political causes. So I spent three different periods in Dharamsala, 6 months, 6 months, and 4 months, and studying Tibetan history and politics and talking to Tibetans. And then each time going back to the United States, selling Tibetan carpets from Nepal, as many of us did. And finally, I was convinced that to pursue a history of Tibet, I needed to go back to school.
Right.
And I did. It was my friend Matthew Capstein, who was the foremost Tibet scholar,
Matthew,
who was my friend from Nepal,
Right.
who suggested I should go to the Fletcher School at Tufts University. So I did. I went there. I got a bachelor's from Tufts and then entered the Fletcher School, which is a graduate school of international relations. Spent altogether doing first a master's and then a PhD. And then all dedicated to writing this book,
Tibetan Nation,
Tibetan Nation, which is 700 pages and it was quite successful, actually, given that it's so long. It was rather expensive in the first edition.
I think this book is so important. If you're learning about Tibet, everybody should read this book.
Thanks. It took me from 1982, when Doma first gave me the idea that this is what I should do with my life. It took 14 years until this was published. This was published in 1996. By that time, I had moved to Washington, looking to find a job related to Tibet in the political realm. I actually applied to the CIA with a recommendation from Senator Moynihan.
Moynihan, yeah.
But
who is really support for Tibetan cause.
Yes. But the CIA didn't care anything for they wanted young kids, who they could train to just do what they wanted to do. They didn't care about somebody who wanted to pursue their own issue.
Right.
But I was in Washington and all the time going to campaign for Tibet, talking to Lodi Gary.
Right.
And he told me that there was in the works was creation of Radio Free
Radio
Asia.
Free, right, right.
And in 1996, Radio Free Asia was created. And Jigme Ngappo, my good friend from Campaign for Tibet,
Right,
was named as the first director.
right.
Jigme managed to bring me on as a contractor. I would write a program in English, and one of the Tibetan staff would translate it and broadcast it. And the first program I did was a long series of programs about the Panchen Lama's 70,000 character petition to the Chinese government, which had just been released.
Right, right.
After a year and a half, I was offered a full-time position at Radio Free Asia.
Yeah, Warren, we are started at Radio Free Asia at the same time, 1998.
Right.
Before that, I was in London. I working for Tibet Information Network, led by Ruby Barnard.
Right.
So at that time, I heard too their creation, Radio Free Asia. Do you remember their first name? They give some kind of specific network.
Asia Pacific Network.
Right, right, yeah.
That was an attempt to try to avoid the association with Radio Free Europe, which was known to have been financed by the CIA during the 1950s. And so also because they hoped that if it were thought to be less political, then certain countries would allow the use of VOA broadcasters to, like in places like Sri Lanka and Thailand, where they had very powerful Voice of America broadcasting systems. That they thought if they could basically disguise the nature of Radio Free Asia, that those countries would allow them to use their transmitters. Well, that didn't work because the people the senators and congressmen who started Radio Free Asia wanted it to be called Radio Free Asia.
Right, right.
Because they were not ashamed of the legacy of Radio Free Europe.
Right. Also, they want to come kind of challenge to Chinese communist.
Exactly.
After 1989.
They wanted it to be political.
Right, right.
So eventually, the name Radio Free Asia was chosen. But then Sri Lanka and Thailand would not allow us to use their transmitters. We ended up using transmitters out of Tinian and Saipan Islands in the Pacific, which were far, far away from Tibet.
Right.
And other places like in an old Soviet jamming broadcast from Tajikistan, I believe.
Right.
Were used, and basically it was very hard to get our signal into Tibet.
Yeah, Warren, I see now, and the U.S. government now kind of dismantle Radio Free Asia and VOA Tibet service,
right,
which is very important for Tibetan movement. So you worked there over 20 years. I worked there over 27 years. So what do you think Radio Free Asia's role for Tibetan movement?
I think it was very important. The problem is it's all international broadcasting, VOA and Radio Free Asia, are outward facing. It's only the people that we broadcast to who are aware of it. So that Americans, if you and I both probably had this experience, if you tell someone you work for Radio Free Asia, most Americans have never heard of Radio Free Asia. Right. Because it's outward facing. That's why it was easy for them to eliminate it, because there was no basically American constituency that would defend Radio Free Asia or VOA or US aid, which is far bigger than international broadcasting. All of these international broadcasting and international assistance were eliminated by Elon Musk, just without a thought. And they had no idea what they were doing, because Tibetans understood the value of Radio Free Asia and Voice of America.
And the Chinese government knows what's yes. challenge, what's important
yes.
Radio Free Asia, VOA for Tibetan and the Chinese people.
Yes.
But that's harmful Chinese government.
Yes.
What do you think, Chinese government think about this happened?
Well, they were very happy about it.
Mm.
They were popping the champagne corks in Beijing.
Yeah, that's why I want to ask you. You study a lot of things, but China's Tibet, you mostly write about Chinese propaganda.
Yeah,
They are trying to influence the whole world, rewrite narrative about Tibetan history.
right.
So what do you think? Chinese government have more kind of opportunity to do their propaganda internationally?
They do. There's no counter argument to them now.
Right.
And the people who eliminated international broadcasting have no idea what they were doing. They were just interested in cost cutting, or actually they were just interested in eliminating all liberal initiatives in government. Well, another thing about Radio Free Asia that most people don't understand is RFA had a very good website in English and in
Right.
Tibetan where they were getting information from Tibet. And I've
Exactly.
used that in my latest book I'm writing. I've used
Yeah.
that. What's actually happening in Tibet was revealed more by Radio Free Asia than anyone. And there were very few, mostly just scholars who were using that information. But it was very important, and now that's gone too.
Yeah. Also, politicians use that.
Yeah,
State Department's report,
yeah,
religion freedom in no report they use about
yeah,
RFA's, information from
yeah.
Tibet. When we talk more about your book, this is Tibetan nation you write a long time ago. Afterward, you write 4 books. Can you talk about a little bit each of the books?
This book, China's Tibet, is mostly about the Chinese propaganda about Tibet from the 1950s and 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
Some of their official propaganda, but also some of the Westerners, very idealistic, socialist type, left-leaning Westerners who were allowed to go to Tibet
Right,
and
right.
wrote books about what they thought was happening, and they were totally fooled by what the Chinese told them was happening, which wasn't really what was happening. After that, I wrote this book, Tibet's Last Stand.
Right,
This
right.
is about the uprising of 2008.
Right, right, yeah.
And this, actually, both of these, this book came out in 2008, this came out in 2010. And both of them sold quite well because there was still a lot of interest in Tibet,
Mm-hmm.
especially because of the uprising of 2008. Most recently, I've written this, Tibet's Fate, which is mostly about this. Includes a lot of Tibetan accounts of what they experienced, and also my own experience of going to Lhasa in 1982 and working at Radio Free Asia.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I really read this book. It's very interesting. One end we talk about he's alive in 1982 in Lhasa and Dharamsala in Nepal. Lots of them write very beautifully.
Right, thank you. Then this book, Chinese Propaganda on Tibet, which is very specialized and of interest to only a few people apparently, and also because it's a limited edition, it was a rather high price. And but anyhow, it exists as a reference book of all the. It's about the Chinese famous articles, propaganda articles about Tibet,
Mm-hmm.
and my response or my refutation of their propaganda.
What do you refer about Chinese propaganda article?
Um, I just a lot of their propaganda is, especially from the 50s and 60s, is
Mm-hmm.
just it's really ridiculous. I mean, it hardly needs any comment because it's so ridiculous on its face that it's unbelievable.
Right.
It's all Tibetans are singing and dancing in the streets because they're so happy they've been liberated from their own government and their own social
Right.
system and political system and their own religion, and because Tibet was so close to the outside world, there was no one to give a counter argument. Even Tibetans were unable to, because Tibetans were not mostly after 59, the refugee access. During the 60s, there were many fewer people able to escape. In the 70s, that was also true. So Chinese propaganda was basically unrefuted.
Right.
There were a few Tibetans who gave accounts but there was this idea in international relations that you can't believe refugees because they're obviously biased. And the stories they were telling about what the Chinese were doing in Tibet were so opposite to what the Chinese themselves were saying that Tibetans weren't believed in the 70s. That began to change in the 80s.
Right.
When Westerners were able to go to Tibet, Tibetans were able to go to Tibet, Tibetans were able to leave Tibet and tell their stories.
Yeah.
Tibet became a larger international issue, more information came out, and things like Voice of America and Radio Free Asia were created.
Yeah, thank you very much for watching this interview. You should read Warren Smith's books. Really, you will know the history and recent situation, what's happened in Tibet and in exile. Also, internationally Tibetan issue will be learning from this book. Warren, as I mentioned earlier, you dedicated your whole life for Tibet cause. So what do you think Tibetan strike right now?
I wish I could be optimistic, but I'm writing another book now about what's happened since 2008 with the settlement of nomads, with religious persecution, with the language issue where Tibetan school children are being made to study in Chinese medium language. It's just the Chinese seem to have learned what they need to do to repress Tibetan culture, and they're doing it. And I wish I had a solution, or I could tell Tibetans what to do, but
yeah, for me, I'm really worried now in the Tibetan issue because up to now, China tried to force us, but Tibetans inside Tibet and outside, they are challenged and a different way keep and preserve their culture and language. Yeah. Right now, Chinese government systematically, teaching the kindergarten, dismiss Tibet language and teaching Chinese. So I think after 10 years for these kids grow up, really difficult to speak Tibetan, and really that is a big challenge we face now.
It really is.
Yeah. Thank you, Warren Smith. My last question, what do you hope for Tibet in the future?
Tibetans are very resilient people. They're very strong people. Their culture is very strong. They're very attractive people. This is why I'm not the only NG who dedicated his life to the Tibetan cause. So Tibetans I don't think they'll ever give up. And they adapt. The people inside Tibet have adapted to the situation that they're presented with. And some of them, they still have, I don't want to say they have no agency meaning they are not unable to affect what the Chinese are doing there. They still do have some agency in that they are able to affect their own situation. And they're able to resist. You can't openly resist in any way, but you can sort of quietly resist and basically carve out your own lifestyle within a very restrictive Chinese system.
Okay, thank you very much, my good friend Warren Smith.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody, to watching this interview. If you want to listen and watch thoughtful discussion about Tibet, please subscribe my YouTube channel. Thank you.